The Ducks fall in the NHL Draft again, thanks to the Edmonton Oilers, who are now in the Stanley Cup Final. We'll talk about all of that on this edition of Locked On Anaheim Ducks.
You're Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jason J.D. Hernandez. I've been covering hockey for well over a decade. I'm also the public address voice for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, and this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. As I just mentioned, I'm the public address voice for the Coachella Valley Firebirds, who are still in a playoff run of their own, which will explain why this is going to be kind of a weird week of podcasts. By the time you see this, I might be in a different state. I'll talk about that at the end of this podcast. But in the meantime, we've got to talk about the fact that the Ducks are getting snake bitten again, thanks to that trade for Adam Henry, or the trade to the Oilers, where Edmonton got Adam Henrique and Sam Carrick. We are going to talk about this because it bears mentioning. That pick was looking like it was going to be the 22nd, 23rd, 24th pick. Then Edmonton got a little bit hot. They maintained their status in the Pacific Division. They went from third place in the division to second. I mean, they were doing okay before the trade. They did better after the trade. In fact, this is a trade that Oilers fans are going to look back on and say, dang, we won that trade. And you know what? I'm going to come out and say it. They did. The Oilers won that trade in the short term and possibly the long term too, because I'll admit, I thought this was going to be an early 20s pick. I didn't think Edmonton would make it this far. And I thought, okay, Edmonton gets a rental and they might get a couple of rounds. I legit thought they would win the first round against the Kings and then lose. Like, I really thought they were going to lose the second round against the Canucks or some other team. Then again, I didn't count on Thatcher Demko getting hurt at the start of the playoffs. No one counted on that. And I think really no one counted on the fact that, yeah, Carrick and Henrique have made a big difference in that trade, like a massive difference in that trade. So you want to talk about short term who won that trade? It is obviously the Edmonton Oilers, because they're in the Stanley Cup Final. Yeah, it absolutely was a win for the Oilers in that regard. And it's also a win for the Oilers because they are no longer giving up an early 20s pick. They are now giving up the 31st or 32nd pick, and that is the big headline as far as Ducks fans are concerned. That pick is now going to be 31st or 32nd. Ouch. I thought it'd be 29th. I legit thought Dallas was going to win that series against Edmonton, but that is not the case. So what happens now? Well, the Ducks now have to kind of just go back to the drawing board. Okay, so now there's going to be guys that are not going to be available at 29 or 30. Now we have to think about 31 or 32. And based on what a lot of fans are saying, Edmonton could win the whole thing. So now you've got to think about 32nd pick, the last pick in the NHL draft. That's where it begins to get pretty slim for the Ducks. And honestly, comparing 22, 23, 24 to 31, 32, that's a pretty significant difference. And I do not envy the Ducks at all. Like, really don't envy them at all. Because where they go from here is, in the short term, it's going to be tough. It makes It makes the rebuild a little bit tougher still. And even thinking about just the draft lottery, they didn't move up again. Now, the Ducks didn't move down, at least this year. They didn't fall from 1 to 2 like last year. They didn't fall from 3 to 4. They stayed at 3. But it would have been nice to move up in this draft, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be nice? And in that 31, 32, 33 range, you're looking at depth guys that might make a difference in San Diego at this point. That's where they're at in this draft. So just a tough break as far as the Anaheim Ducks are concerned. But hey, you know what? Good for Corey Perry. Good for Adam Henrique. Good for Sam Carrick. They're going to get their shot at the Stanley Cup. They really are. And the way I'm going to approach this particular podcast is I'm going to talk about how else the Ducks have been not screwed necessarily, but how they've been affected by past successes on other trades. So I'll talk about that a little bit. And I'll talk about the series that were. So I think that's the direction I'm going to go in this podcast today. But for now, let's think back to that trade. The Ducks got a first round pick, which is now going to be 31-32, and a conditional 5th round pick in next year's draft, and half retained with Carrick's contract, Henrique's contract. Yeah. That's tough. That is now tough. And if the Ducks do not strike gold with that 31st or 32nd pick, in the short term, the Oilers won the trade. In the long term, if the Oilers wind up winning the cup, then short term and long term, the Ducks got fleeced. I hate to say it, but this already is looking like it's a trade where the Ducks got fleeced in this one. And you just hate to see it. You do. All right. We're going to head to the first intermission, and I'm going to talk about past instances where this has happened to the Ducks. Like, this is not the first time this has happened to the Ducks as far as trades. And in the long term, maybe the Ducks got fleeced in those trades too. So stay locked in. And now a brief word from FanDuel. And folks, we are in the Stanley Cup Final. We're in the NBA Finals, which don't start for a few days, but it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and who's going to win the championships. Is it going to be the Boston Celtics, or maybe the Dallas Mavericks with the upset? Or could it be in the NHL, the Edmonton Oilers or the Florida Panthers? Who knows? So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And please, folks, gamble responsibly. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you're locked in with Jason JD Hernandez. So I'm going to talk about prior experiences that the Ducks have had as far as trade deadline deals that may have hurt them a little bit. Now, I mentioned this is not the first time this has happened to the Ducks. In fact, we only have to go back 5 years when I first started with Locked On Anaheim Ducks, and we went over the 2019 NHL Draft. And the Ducks had a couple of picks in that draft. I mean, it wasn't too bad. I mean, they got Trevor Zegras in that draft, which wound up being a very good pick at number 9. All things considered, that 9th pick was very good because looking at who came before him, Capo Caco, Bowen Byram, Alex Turcotte, which has been a big disappointment with the Los Angeles Kings, But then the pick right before, Philip Broberg, he's going, I mean, oof. Philip Broberg, who is currently with the Edmonton Oilers. Oof, oof, oof. Yeah, you see how that one hurts a little bit. But then right after that was Trevor Zegras, and Z is still one of the premier scorers in the Ducks organization, for what it's worth. But then you go down to that 29th pick in the 2019 draft. And the reason the Ducks picked 29th is because of the San Jose Sharks. So this was a trade deadline deal in the 2018-2019 season where Brandon Montour got sent to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Brendan Gooley. That pick, which would have been like maybe early 20s, but no, San Jose had to go and do well in the playoffs. They had to go and make it to the Western Conference Final, where they ultimately lost to the eventual Stanley Cup champion, the St. Louis Blues. So that one kind of hurts. So that pick went all the way down to 29th. And who did they get with that pick? Braden Tracy. At the time, I thought that was a decent enough pick, but looking back now, yeah, this might be a trade where long-term the Ducks were the losers in that trade too. Look at Brandon Montour now. Look at him now. I'll talk about that another time. But Brandon Montour is now playing for Stanley Cup this season as well. And that's a big, big piece to lose for the Anaheim Ducks in the hopes that they would strike gold in that draft. And unfortunately for the Ducks organization, Braden Tracy has not panned out the way they would have liked. Even this year, he struggled at times to find his place in the San Diego Gulls lineup. He was healthy scratched once or twice this season. I mean, is it time to let go of Braden Tracy? Did the Ducks wind up losing that trade? My imaginary magic 8-ball says that all signs point to yes. So that's one that the Ducks might want back. One that the Ducks definitely want back, the 2016 NHL Draft. This one also hurts because the Ducks wound up picking 30th in the 2016 NHL Draft, which is good enough for last. Now, how did that happen? Well, let's go back to that trade. Ducks and the Penguins and the Maple Leafs. The Ducks traded Freddie Anderson to Toronto for a second-round pick in 2017 and that pick in 2016. So that's where the Penguins' first-round pick went to Anaheim. Now, Toronto previously got that pick from Pittsburgh. That was like a massive trade. That was the Phil Kessel trade, for those of you that like trade trees. So the Ducks got the first-round pick from Pittsburgh. Yeah, you remember what happened to Pittsburgh that year? Who remembers? Oh yeah, that's right. They won the Cup. That's why that pick went all the way down to 30th. The Pittsburgh Penguins had to go and win the Stanley Cup that year. So, congrats to the Pens for what it's worth. But, oh boy, that one hurts. That easily could have been a 26th pick. And by the way, you know who went 26th in that NHL draft? None other than All-Star Tage Thompson. Can you imagine how much different the Ducks team would be if they got Tage Thompson in that draft? But then again, would Thompson become the player that he is as a result of that trade? Who knows? Hindsight is always 20/20 there. But who the Ducks got with that 30th pick? Sam Steele, who just got eliminated from the playoffs. And actually, I'm going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about the last couple series because I talked about the fact that Edmonton's to the Cup. So I'm going to talk about those series that just took place on the final segment. So that's what I'm going to do. But Sam Steele wound up not really working out for the Ducks, and he got picked 30th. and he got shipped off to Dallas, and the rest is history there. And by the way, just one more time that happens to the Ducks, and this one actually turned out to be like pretty decent. 2011, the Ducks made a trade and wound up with the last pick in that draft, number 30. So this was where the Boston Bruins first round pick went to Anaheim, and it sent Anaheim's first round pick to Toronto in exchange for another pick. So this was kind of like a weird like 3-team trade where Anaheim's pick wound up being 22nd overall. That got sent away. And Boston wound up winning the whole thing in 2011 over the Vancouver Canucks in 7 games. And with that final pick, hey, the Ducks at least got an all-star out of it. They got Ricardo Rakell. So that one actually did kind of work out. But 26th in that draft, Philippe Deneau. Yeah, that one could have been solid. But 2010, the Ducks wound up with the 29th pick in that draft and got Emerson Edom. This one came from the Philadelphia Flyers. And that was the result of the Chris Pronger trade. And with that 29th pick, the Ducks got Emerson Edom. Philadelphia wasn't exactly a high-ranked team in that playoffs. I mean, they could have gotten Kevin Hayes. They could have gotten Evgeny Kuznetsov. They could have gotten just a laundry list of players that were available in that draft. And they wound up with Emerson Edom. But for what it's worth, Edom is currently the play-by or color commentator for the Ducks, for what it's worth. So that's something at least, right? All right, we're going to head into the second intermission. And right after this, I'm going to talk about how we got here this year. Yeah, I'm going to talk about the Western Conference Final and the Eastern Conference Final and how the former Ducks did in those series. We'll get to that on the other side. Welcome back to Locked On Anaheim Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Once again, you are locked in with Jason JD Hernandez. Let's talk about the West Final and the East Final. I'm going to start in the Eastern Conference with the New York Rangers taking on the Florida Panthers. This was a terrific series for one former Duck in particular, and his name is Brandon Montour, who has been good all playoffs long. He currently has 3 goals, 6 assists for 9 points. He has looked terrific in this playoff. He's one of the leading point scorers for the Panthers in this playoff. Right above him are guys like Matthew Tkachuk, who's leading the team with 19 points, Carter Verhaeghe, Alexander Barkov, Sam Bennett, and some guy named Sam Reinhart, who is now going to get paid. Once upon a time, I said that the Ducks should go after someone from the Florida Panthers. Yeah, maybe not so much anymore. Now, as far as goal scoring, he didn't have a big series against the Rangers. But as far as everything else, as far as getting the big hits, as far as being the difference in the last 3 games, because he was kind of non-existent the first 3 games of this series. In fact, he didn't have a good start to this series. He didn't. And 2 of those were overtime losses. And then game 4 happened. And he got a very important assist in that game. And he just laid down the boom on everyone else. On everyone that was wearing a New York jersey. He just went after every Ranger possible. And it was glorious. If you're a Ducks fan and you're still rooting for Brandon Montour, then yeah, you effing loved that. I mean, we never saw this with the Ducks. We very rarely saw that side of him in an Anaheim uniform. To just lay down hit after hit after hit and take no prisoners. And he did that in game 4 and in game 5. And in game 6, all wins for the Florida Panthers. So as far as that's concerned, he had a good second half of this series. Good for him. As far as other Ducks that are in it, Dmitry Kulikov, he's also played every game in this playoff. He's also wound up with some solid depth minutes and getting some pretty decent hits himself. and just being a very important depth guy for the Florida Panthers. So for what it's worth, he's played a role and he's done okay at it. And he's just a small piece of that puzzle to help the Panthers make it to the Cup final. But a couple other players that I want to talk about, Josh Mahura, who is he's been a healthy scratch all playoff long. He's like the 21st or 22nd guy. If someone gets hurt, Mahura is going to slot right in there. But also, got to give props to one of my favorite people of all time, Anthony Stolarz, who has been backing up like crazy. But Sergei Bobrovsky has completely owned the last 3 games. In this playoff, he's 12-5, a .908 save percentage, 2.20 goals against average. The goals against is pretty good. And Stolarz is just marveling from the sidelines at Sergei Bobrovsky, who I think could be a competitor for the Conn Smythe if Florida wins it. I'd put him up to consideration for that. I would. Now the Western Finals. This was the one that I did not expect, because I do want to give this stat. In the first round and the second round for the Dallas Stars, their power play was over 25% in rounds 1 and 2. Western Final, there were 14 or 15 power play opportunities for the Dallas Stars. Goose egg. They went over in this series. Their special teams were not good. I think that was the biggest difference as to why the Oilers defeated the Dallas Stars. The Stars' once brilliant penalty kill was just decimated by the just pinpoint passing of the Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid had one of the sickest goals you will ever see in playoff history in Game 6. That first goal where he just went tweeners, almost nutmegged someone, and slipped one right past the before-mentioned Sam Steele. Sam Steele did not have a good Game 6. In fact, he got torched in that Game 6. Sad to say, Sam Steele got caught flat-footed more than once or twice in this series, but Edmonton is that good of an offensive team. They're that gifted of an offensive team. And you look at, you start with Connor McDavid, or McJesus as they call him. He was brilliant in Game 6. The big players show up in the big moments, and Connor McDavid did that. As far as the veterans for the Dallas Stars, they go home empty-handed. Sam Steele goes home empty-handed. And I want to talk about the former Ducks in Edmonton. I got to talk first about Sam Carrick, who's played here and there. I mentioned Sam Carrick being a big difference in the previous series. The limited action he's gotten in this playoff have been very solid. The time that he's gotten in this playoff, I think he's been brilliant. Now, granted, he only has 1 assist in this playoff, but it was an important assist. And as far as just, game by game, where you've seen him, especially in this last series, he didn't play in every game against the Dallas Stars, but he also got some big hits, and he also got some important time on the penalty kill. He was big in this series. He's a big part of the reason why the Oilers are moving on. He's a big reason why the Dallas Stars went over on the power play. So this is not just me being a Sam Carrick fan, but this is me being truthful. He was a big difference as far as the penalty kill. Corey Perry, still irritating guys, still making a difference, still doing the little things wherever he can. So Perry's made a difference. And Adam Henrique came back and had some big face-offs, had some big, not big moments, but there was little plays here and there that wound up leading to big plays for the Edmonton Oilers. So all 3 of the former Ducks doing well for Edmonton. As far as stats are concerned, Corey Perry and Sam Carrick each have an assist. Adam Henrique, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. And as far as former Ducks, Brandon Montour still leading with those 9 points. So that's where the former Ducks are. And now I ask you, which former Ducks are you rooting for? On Florida's side, you have Brandon Montour, who's been around for a little bit. One of the nice guys all around. Anthony Stolarz. Can he get his name on the cup? Dmitry Kulikov. He could be on the cup. Josh Mahura. He could be there as well. So as far as sentimentality, there's a little bit on Florida, but there's much more in Edmonton. Sam Carrick, he has worked his butt off his entire career, and he could be rewarded here. How about Adam Henrique? He's been around for a long time. He's been in a cup final before. He's never won it. So this could be big for him. And then there's Corey Perry. Corey Perry has not won a Stanley Cup since 2007. It's been a long, long time, and we're kind of running short. So I'm going to piggyback this into the next episode. So I am going to talk a little bit more about just Corey Perry and the road that he's taken to get to this point. So that'll be on our next podcast, and I'll talk a little bit more about just former Ducks in general, and we'll go into some draft stuff in our next podcast. So do be on the lookout for that. All right. Before I wrap up, I mentioned that I'm going to be heading out of town, actually heading to Wisconsin, since I'll be checking out the Firebirds and the Milwaukee Admirals in the Western Conference Finals. As of this recording, the Firebirds have a 2-0 lead over the Milwaukee Admirals. So I'll be heading out of town for that. So I may get an episode out from Milwaukee, but I'll record a couple from here before we head out. So thanks all of you for following along. Thanks for just checking in. In the meantime, just want to say goodbye for now. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Don't forget this podcast is free and available across all platforms, including Stitcher, Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. You can follow me on Twitter X at StimpyJD. And hey, the show's Twitter X is back. Hurrah. A little bit of a just stuff happening there on that Twitter account, but we're back. So check out LO_Ducks on Twitter X. The email address is lockedonanaheimducks@gmail.com. And once again, thank you all for your continued support. It is so greatly appreciated. For Locked on Anaheim Ducks, I'm Jason JD Hernandez saying have a great rest of the day. Please remember to be safe out there, be kind to one another, and Ducks fly together.